Casa Mila, in reference to its unconventional rough-hewn appearance, is a modernist building in Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain. It was the last private residence designed by architect Antoni Gaudí and was built between 1906 and 1912. The building was commissioned in 1906 by Pere Mila and his wife Roser Sagiman. At the time, it was controversial because of its undulating stone facade, twisting wrought iron balconies, and designed by Josep Maria Jujol. Several structural innovations include a self-supporting stone facade and a free-plan floor, underground garage, and the spectacular terrace on the roof. In 1984, it was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. Since 2013, it has been the headquarters of the Fundació Catalunya La Pedrera, which manages visits to the building, exhibitions, and other cultural and educational activities at Casa Mila. Building history. Architect Antoni Gaudí I Cornet was born on June 25, 1852, in Catalonia, Spain. As a child, Gaudí's health was poor, suffering from rheumatism. Because of this, he was afforded lengthy periods of time resting at his summer house in Riotums. Here he spent a large portion of his time outdoors, allowing him to deeply study nature. This would become one of the major influences in his architecture to come. Gaudí was a very practical man and a craftsman at his core. In his work he followed impulses and turned creative plans into reality. His openness to embrace new styles, combined with a vivid imagination, helped mold new styles of architecture and consequently helped push the limits of construction. Today he is regarded as a pioneer of the modern architecture style. In 1870, Gaudí moved to Barcelona to study architecture. He was an inconsistent student who showed flashes of brilliance. It took him 8 years to graduate due to a mix of health complications, military service, as well as other activities. After completion of his education, he became a prolific architect as well as designing gardens, sculptures, and all other decorative arts. Gaudí's most famous works consisted of several buildings: Parque Güell, Palacio Güell, Casa Mila, Casa Vicens. He also is attributed for his work on the crypt of La Sagrada Familia and the Nativity facade. Gaudí's work at the time was both admired and criticized for his bold, innovative solutions. Gaudí was injured on June 7, 1926, when he was run over by a tram. He later died in the hospital due to his injuries on June 10, 1926, at the age of 73. A few years after his death, his fame became renowned by critics and the general public alike. Building owners. The owners of Casa Mila in 1910. Portrait of Pere Mila. Roser Sagiman, spouse of Pere Mila. Casa Mila was built for Roser Sagiman and her husband Pere Mila. Roser Sagiman was the wealthy widow of Josep Guardiola, an Indiano or Americano, or former colonist returned from the Americas, who had made his fortune with a coffee plantation in Guatemala. Her second husband, Pere Mila, was a developer known for his flamboyant lifestyle. Construction process. La Casa Mila being built. In 1905, Mila and Sagiman married, and on June 9th, Roser Sagiman bought a house with garden, which occupied an area of 1,835 square meters, located on Paseo de Gracia, 92. In September, they commissioned Gaudí for building them a new house with the idea of living in the main floor and renting out the rest of the apartments. On February 2, 1906, the project was presented to the Barcelona City Council, and the works began, demolishing the pre-existing building instead of reforming it, as in the case of the Casa Batlló. The building was completed in December 1910, and the owner asked Gaudí to make a certificate to inhabit the main floor, which the City Council authorized in October 1911, and the couple moved in. On October 31, 1912, Gaudí issued the certificate stating that, in accordance with his plans and his direction, the work had been completed and the whole house was ready to be rented. Critics and controversies. The building did not respect any rules of conventional style, for which Gaudí received much criticism. To begin with, the name La Pedrera is in fact a nickname assigned by the citizens who disapproved of its unusualness. The unique structure of the building and the relationship between the building's architect and Pere Mila became the object of ridicule for the people of Barcelona and many humorous publications of the time. Catholic symbols. a fragment from first drafts of the architectural plans from 1906, showing the sculptures mounted on the upper facade. Gaudí, a Catholic and a devotee of the Virgin Mary, planned for the Casa Mila to be a spiritual symbol. Overt religious elements include an excerpt from the Rosary on the cornice and planned statues of Mary, specifically Our Lady of the Rosary, and two archangels, Saint Michael and Saint Gabriel. However, the Casa Mila was not built entirely to Gaudí's specifications. The local government ordered the demolition of elements that exceeded the height standard for the city, and fined the Milas for many infractions of building codes. After Semana Tragica, an outbreak of anti-clericalism in the city, Mila prudently decided to forego the religious statues. Gaudí contemplated abandoning the project, but a priest persuaded him to continue. Change of ownership. Interior of Casa Mila in 1910. In 1940, Mila died. Sagiman sold the property in 1946 for 18 million pesetas to Josep Maria Jujol, known for his department stores on Ronda de Sant Antoni A, in partnership with the family of Pio Rubert Laporta. The Companyia Immobiliaria Provenza S.A. Cipsa was founded to administer the building. Roser Sagiman continued to live on the main floor until her death in 1964. Casa Mila in 1914. The new owners divided the first floor facing Cara de Provenças A into 5 apartments instead of the original 2. In 1953, they commissioned Francisco Juan Barba Casinies to convert 13 rubbish-filled attic laundry rooms to street-facing apartments, leaving a communal hallway on the side facing the courtyards. Some of these 2- or 3-room apartments had a loft and were designed and furnished in a typical early 1950s style using brick, ceramic, and wood. Items of furniture, such as the Pedrera chair CA, were reminiscent of Eero Saarinen's work. The insurance company Northern took over the main floor in 1966. By then, Casa Mila had housed a bingo hall, an academy, and the offices of Cementos Molins and Inoxcrum, among others. Maintenance costs were high, and the owners had allowed the building to become dilapidated, causing stones to loosen in 1971. Josep Anton Comas made some emergency repairs, especially to the paintings in the courtyards, while respecting the original design. Restoration. After being repainted a dreary brown, the building's colors were restored in the 1980s. Gaudí's work was designated a historic and artistic monument on July 24, 1969. Casa Mila was in poor condition in the early 1980s. It had been painted a dreary brown, and many of its interior color schemes had been abandoned or allowed to deteriorate, but it has been restored since, including restoring many of the original colors. In 1984, the building became part of a World Heritage Site, encompassing some of Gaudí's works. The Barcelonan City Council tried to rent the main floor as an office for the 1992 Olympic bid. Finally, the day before Christmas 1986, Caixa Catalonia bought La Pedrera for 900 million pesetas. On February 19, 1987, urgently needed work began on the restoration and cleaning of the façade. The work was done by the architects Joseph Emilio Hernandez Cross and Rafael Vila. The renovated main floor opened in 1990 as part of the Cultural Olympiad of Barcelona. The floor became an exhibition room with an example of modernism in the example. Design. The building is 1,323 square meters per floor on a plot of 1,620 square meters. Gaudí made the first sketches in his workshop in the Sagrada Familia. He designed the house as a constant curve, both outside and inside, incorporating ruled geometry and naturalistic elements. The courtyard. Casa Mila consists of 2 buildings, which are structured around 2 courtyards that provide light to the 9 stories: basement, ground floor, mezzanine, main or noble floor for upper floors, and an attic. The basement was intended to be the garage, the main floor the residence of the Milas, a flat of all 1,323 square meters, and the rest distributed over 20 apartments. The resulting layout is shaped like an asymmetrical 8 because of the different shapes and sizes of the courtyards. The attic housed the laundry and drying areas, forming an insulating space for the building and simultaneously determining the levels of the roof. One of the most notable elements of the building is the roof, crowned with skylights, staircase exits, fans, and chimneys. All of these elements, constructed out of brick covered with lime, broken marble, or glass, have a specific architectural function, but are also real sculptures integrated into the building. The apartments feature plastered ceilings with dynamic reliefs, handcrafted wooden doors, windows, and furniture, as well as hydraulic tiles and various ornamental elements. The stairways were intended to serve as entries, with the main access to the apartments by elevator except for the noble floor, where Gaudí added a prominent interior staircase. Gaudí wanted the people who lived in the flats to all know each other. Therefore, there were only elevators on every other floor, so people on different floors would meet one another. Structure: Casa Mila balcony, showing the self-supporting stone facade, also supported by curved iron beams. Casa Mila is characterized by its self-supporting stone facade, meaning that it is free of load-bearing walls. The facade connects to the internal structure of each floor by means of curved iron beams surrounding the perimeter of each floor. This construction system allows, on one hand, large openings in the facade which give light to the homes, and on the other, free structuring of the different levels, so that internal walls can be added and demolished without affecting the stability of the building. This allows the owners to change their minds at will and to modify, without problems, the interior layout of the homes. Constructive and decorative items. Facade. The facade is composed of large blocks of limestone from the Garraf Massif on the first floor and from the Villefranche quarry for the higher levels. The blocks were cut to follow the plot of the projection of the model, then raised to their location and adjusted to align in a continuous curve to the pieces around them. The windows of La Pedrera are an integral part of the overall facade design. Gaudí made sure that the windows were of varying sizes, designed to optimize the amount of natural light that could enter the building. Viewed from the outside, the building has three parts: the main body of the six-story blocks with winding stone floors, two floors set a block back with a different curve, similar to waves, a smoother texture and whiter color, and with small holes that look like embrasures, and finally the body of the roof. Gaudí's original facade had some of its lower-level ironwork removed. In 1928, the tailor Mozella opened the first store in La Pedrera, and he eliminated the bars. This did not concern anyone, because in the middle of 20th century, wrought ironwork had little importance. The ironwork was lost until a few years later, when Americans donated one of them to the MoMA, where it is on display. With restoration initiatives launched in 1987, the facade was rejoined to some pieces of stone that had fallen. In order to respect the fidelity of the original, material was obtained from the Villefranche quarry, even though by then it was no longer operating. Hall and courtyards. The building uses a completely original solution to solve the issue of a lobby being too closed and dark. Its open and airy courtyards provide a place of transit and are directly visible to those accessing the building. There are two patios on the side of the Passeig de Gràcia and of the Street Province. Patios. The patios structurally are key as supporting loads of interior facades. The floor of the courtyard is supported by pillars of cast iron. In the courtyard, there are traditional elliptical beams and girders, but Gaudí applied an ingenious solution of using two concentric cylindrical beams with stretched radial beams, like the spokes of a bicycle. They form a point outside of the beam to 2 points above and below, making the function of the central girder a keystone and working in tension and compression simultaneously. This supported structure is 12 feet in diameter and is considered the soul of the building, with a clear resemblance to Gothic crypts. The centerpiece was built in a shipyard by Josep Maria Jujol, who copied a steering wheel, interpreting Gaudí's intent as to represent the helm of the ship of life. Interior gates. Paintings cover the walls, with access protected by a giant iron gate. Access is protected by a massive iron gate with a design attributed to Jujol. It was originally used by both people and cars, as access to the garage is in the basement, now an auditorium. The two halls are fully polychrome with oil paintings on the plaster surfaces, with eclectic references to mythology and flowers. During construction, there was a problem, including a basement as a garage for cars, the new invention that was thrilling the bourgeois at the time. The future neighbor Felix Anthony Meadows, owner of Industrial Linera, requested a change because his Rolls-Royce could not access it. Gaudí agreed to remove a pillar on the ramp that led into the garage, so that Felix, who was establishing sales and factory in Paredes del Valles, could go to both places with his car from La Pedrera. For the floors of Casa Mila, Gaudí used a model of floor forms of square timbers, with two colors, and the hydraulic pavement hexagonal pieces of blue and sea motifs that had originally been designed for the Batlló house. The wax was designed in gray by John Bertrand under the supervision of Gaudí, who touched up with their own fingers. In the words of the manufacturer Josep B. Loft, the attic, like in Casa Batlló, Gaudí shows the application of the catenary arch as a support structure for the roof, a form which he had already used shortly after graduating in the wood frameworks of Matura's cooperative known as L'Obrera Madrinense. In this case, Gaudí used the Catalan technique of timbrel, imported from Italy in the 14th century. The attic, where the laundry rooms were located, was a clear room under a Catalan vault roof, supported by 270 parabolic vaults of different heights and spaced by about 80 centimeters. The roof resembles both the ribs of a huge animal and a palm, giving the roof deck a very unconventional shape similar to a landscape of hills and valleys. The shape and location of the courtyards makes the arches higher when the space is narrowed and lower when the space expands. The builder Bayo explained its construction. First, the face of a wide wall was filled with mortar and plastered. Then Canaleta indicated the opening of each arch, and Bayo put a nail at each starting point of the arch at the top of the wall. From these nails was dangled a chain, so that the lowest point coincided with the deflection of the arch. Then the profile displayed on the wall by the chain was drawn, and on this profile the carpenter marked and placed the corresponding centering, and the timbrel vault was started with 3 rows of plain bricks. Gaudí wanted to add a longitudinal axis of bricks connecting all vaults at their keystones. Roof and chimneys. Casa Mila roof architecture. Chimneys known as espantabruxes, which scares. 26. The work of Gaudí on the rooftop of La Pedrera brought his experience at Palau Güell together with solutions that were clearly more innovative, this time creating shapes and volumes with more body, more prominence, and less polychromagy. On the rooftop, there are 6 skylights/staircase exits, 4 of which were covered with broken pottery, and some that ended in a double cross typical of Gaudí. 28 chimneys in several groupings, 2 half-hidden vents whose function is to renew the air in the building, and 4 domes that discharge to the façade. The staircases also house the water tanks, some of which are snail-shaped. The stepped roof of La Pedrera, called the Garden of Warriors, by the poet Pere Mila, because the chimneys appear to be protecting the skylights, has undergone a radical restoration, removing chimneys added in interventions after Gaudí, television antennas, and other elements that degraded the space. The restoration brought back the splendor to the chimneys and the skylights that were covered with fragments of marble and broken Valencia tiles. One of the chimneys was topped with glass pieces. It was said that Gaudí did that the day after the inauguration of the building, taking advantage of the empty bottles from the party. It was restored with the bases of champagne bottles from the early 20th century. The repair work has enabled the restoration of the original impact of the overhangs, made of stone from Ulldecona, with fragments of tiles. This whole set is more colorful than the façade, although here the creamy tones are dominant. Furniture. The building's inside decor, pictured in 2005, has been changed several times, both paint and furniture. Furniture in 2008. Gaudí, as he had done in Casa Batlló, designed furniture specifically for the main floor. This was part of the concept artwork itself integral to modernism, in which the architect assumed responsibility for global issues, such as the structure and the façade, as well as every detail of the decor, designing furniture and accessories such as lamps, planters, floors, or ceilings. This was another point of friction with Sagiman, who complained that there was no straight wall to place her Steinway piano. Gaudí's response was blunt: "So play the violin." 19. The result of these disagreements has been the loss of the decorative legacy of Gaudí, as most of the furniture was removed due to climate change and the changes she made to the main floor when Gaudí died. Some remain in private collections, including a curtain made of oak 4 m, long by 1.96 m, high in the Museum of Catalan Modernism, and a chair and desktop of Mila. Citation needed. Gaudí carved oak doors similar to what he had done for the Casa y Bards, but these were only included on 2 floors, as when Sagiman discovered the price, she decided there would be no more at that quality. Architecture. Scale model at the Catalonia and Miniatura Park. Casa Mila is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Works of Antoni Gaudí. It was a predecessor of some buildings with a similar biomorphic appearance. The 1921 Einstein Tower in Potsdam, designed by Erich Mendelsohn. Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in Manhattan, New York, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Chapelle Notre Dame du Haut, Ronchamp, France, designed by Le Corbusier. The Hundertwasser House and other works by Austrian architect Friedensreich Hundertwasser. Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, by Frank Gehry. Free exhibitions often are held on the first floor, which also provides some opportunity to see the interior design. There is a charge for entrance to the apartment on the 4th floor and the roof. The other floors are not open to visitors. Constructive similarities. Gaudí's La Pedrera was inspired by a mountain, but there is no agreement as to which mountain was the reference model. Joan Burgos thought it was the rocks of Fray Garot in Prades Mountains. Joan Matamala thought that the model could have been Saint Miguel del Fai, while the sculptor Vicente Villarrubias believed it was inspired by the cliffs Torrent Parias in Menorca. Other options include the mountains of Yucasar in Cappadocia, suggested by Juan Goytisolo, or Molagalifa, suggested by Louis Perminier, based on the fact that Gaudí visited the area in 1885 to escape an outbreak of cholera in Barcelona. Some people say that the interior layout of La Pedrera comes from studies that Gaudí made of medieval fortresses. This image is reinforced by the seeming appearance of the rooftop chimneys as sentinels, with great helmets. 28. The structure of the iron door in the lobby does not follow any symmetry, straight or repetitive pattern. Rather, it evokes bubbles of soap that are formed between the hands or the structures of a plant cell. Criticism and controversy. Casa Mila at night.